if both of you keep talking over each other, I'm going to have to mute you until we can sort this out. So let's just try and stick to what we agreed upon from the start. We're going to do 50 minutes, and I'm going to get audience questions that are just directed at one of you, so that it doesn't have to be a rebuttal back and forth. So you can answer that person's question, try to keep it within like a 3-minute time range, and then from that we can move back and forth, okay? So the first one is for Ben. What does he think about Chomsky's genocide denial and protecting genocide denial as free speech? In Ben's eyes, that genocide denial is something we should overlook, or should we actually help spread the fact that Chomsky denies genocide since so many Western leftists gloss over that?
Well, I reject the premise of the question that he does deny genocides, the germ of truth, and this is actually interesting. I think that a fair critique of Chomsky is that sometimes in some situations his instincts were actually a little bit too tanky. So after years of ardent involvement and getting arrested a bunch of times in the anti-war movement, and really being a very loud voice against the atrocities and semi-genocidal policy of the United States in Vietnam, when the first reports started to trickle in about the Khmer Rouge killing fields, his first instinct was to think, okay, this sounds like just more imperialist propaganda about this. And so he was initially somewhat skeptical, but this was for a very short period of time. For decades since then, he hasn't been a genocide denier about the Khmer Rouge. He talks about it all the time. There are no other instances of him engaging in anything that could be called genocide denial. And in fact, the only real example of a full-scale intervention, full-scale invasion of a country that I know of that Chomsky has supported was the intervention by communist Vietnam to invade China to stop that genocide.
Okay, first of all, Zero Tankies actually supported Pol Pot because, so that's like a misuse of the term. So this is what Chomsky said in 1989. The one in Timor we called a Benin bloodbath. The United States didn't care much one way or the other. So hundreds of thousands of Timorese get killed. It's not very interesting. The case in Cambodia was, of course, a nefarious bloodbath, and the bad guys were doing it. And he also later says Cambodia, it was carried out by the enemy Pol Pot. Except for the fact that Pol Pot was not an enemy of the U.S. In fact, Kissinger said, you should tell them we bear no hostility towards them. We would like them to be an independent counterweight to North Vietnam. Ronald Reagan actually supported Pol Pot 3 times in allowing them to be part of the UN. And this is the statement that many human rights activists said, including Jane Fonda. We are profoundly disturbed that for the 3rd year, the United States voted to keep Pol Pot's Democratic Kampuchea in the UN. So if Chomsky, so this happened in the 1980s, why did Chomsky say that Pol Pot was an official enemy in 1989? So, yeah, that's all I had to
respond to that.
Yeah, I'll give you a minute. But again, can we stick to the questions because they're person independent? So let's go down that road.
Yeah.
But yeah.
When Chomsky says bad guy there, he's obviously doing what he very commonly does. If you know Chomsky's style at all, this is a frequent rhetorical device. Dripping with irony, he's using
he called it the
Excuse me, Esha. This is my turn. You can talk later. He's dripping with irony, talking about the language that would be used by right-wing Cold Warriors at the time. Chomsky has everything you said about U.S. support for Pol Pot after that Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia that Chomsky supported is true, of course, but Chomsky has also talked about everything you just said on numerous occasions. The U.S. started supporting Pol Pot after Vietnam invaded, but at the time, it was something that the United States was not yet supported, and in fact, was using the killing fields as propaganda to retroactively justify the war, which is what he's correctly calling attention to. There's no contradiction between this.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to a question for Esha. Okay,
hold on. That's factually just wrong. I suggest that everyone go into literally, like I have it on Twitter. basically, there's a speech. So 1975 was when Henry Kissinger said he supported the Democratic Kampuchea, which is like what Pol Pot came. So I don't understand like where you're getting the whole that the first calls of genocide came from 1977. So I just don't understand where you're getting this from.
Okay.
So
we can't keep doing this.
Chomsky has never said the United States was opposed to Pol Pot in 1975.
Let's just stick to the format, all right? We have 10 minutes left. We get through this 10 minutes. You both get closing arguments, and you don't have to yell at each other anymore. So.
Oh no, we're not yelling. We're just discussing.
Okay, so Esha, what does free speech have to do with canceling Chomsky?
Free speech itself is an example. I'm just saying that I'm not canceling Chomsky, but I'm saying that Chomsky kind of makes you infantile, where you can't tell the difference between the good guys and the bad guys. For example, with Pol Pot versus because he has no class analysis. I mean, there's a quote where Chomsky compares Lenin to Robert McNamara. Is power to the Soviets the same thing as kill everything that moves? Obviously not. So it's a lot of aesthetics. Let's see. There's he also gets into the bumbling empire theory, where he says America often makes mistakes. These are not mistakes. These are basically the U.S. empire protecting the upper class, the bourgeoisie, in exchange for the proletariat. None of this is a mistake. It's all done in order. And then he kind of so that the way he has a values neutral mindset in free speech, where he kind of once it was hilarious. He was like, well, in America, sometimes you get these tenured professors who write books on Holocaust denial. And the first thing that came into my mind is, why the bleep do we have Holocaust deniers who are tenured professors? And so it's a values neutral way that is a bourgeoisie way of looking at human rights that basically idealizes a majority of the revolutions that lose and demonizes all the revolutions that win. And on top of it, the fact that Chomsky fans who read Manufacturing Consent can't actually understand that the U.S. will try to manufacture consent against a socialist revolution is pretty telling.
Okay, for Ben, there are objections to Chomsky's stance free speech with regards to the sorry if I'm mispronouncing this, the Forizon affair or the Forizon affair, maybe? I don't know if it's French. Could you address it, please?
I think that that just goes back to the exact question that Esha was raising earlier about the worker who says Heil Hitler. So Chomsky has certainly condemned Holocaust denial in no uncertain terms. He said we shouldn't even debate it, because when we treat that as being up for debate, then we are we're losing some of our humanity. That should just be exiled to the margins. So he actually supports and basically what he describes the manufacturing consent model being used against Holocaust denial, but he thinks that letting the state, any state, a capitalist state or or a self-described, now often not actually people's state, decide which views you can express and which you shouldn't express is short-sighted and ultimately self-defeating to the project of building socialism.
Okay, for Esha, and if you don't know what this reference is, then my apologies. The question is, what is the Chomsky project, and can you explain it?
For me?
Yeah.
I never said anything about Chomsky's project. I always maintain that he has no project.
Okay, understandable.
Ben is the one who called Chomsky's project.
I did.
Yeah, weird. It was directed at you. All right, let me scroll down to the next question. In your opinion, what exactly is the biggest shortcoming of Chomsky in the modern era? Can we not just use his old teachings and old books and literature as a stepping stone?
Okay, basically he's not adaptable to the situation. He does not look at each individual situation and look at the historical context, look at the material context, and then make a decision on that or a recommendation. so I would like to compare Michael Parenti with Noam Chomsky or Lasordo. For example, so in 2011, when Libya was being invaded, Chomsky made some kind of mild statement that kind of went both ways. And it kind of said there were times when NATO intervention was justified. On the other hand, actually put up this list on Facebook about the 12 things in Libya will never now have now that NATO went in. So just things like that. He does not, so he rejects the idea of dialectic materialism, so he doesn't get these little things, and those little things that he doesn't understand always add up to be in the service of the empire. So what I would recommend is check out Inventing Reality by Michael and compare that with Manufacturing Consent, and you get to make your own decision.
Ask Ben Burgis why it was right for Chomsky to defend the U.S. imperialism in Syria last year.
I don't think he did. I think that as with Libya, actually, I think these are both really good cases for evaluating Chomsky's views. What he's done is, as part of a strategy of unmasking the motives of the intervention, which he said lots of times. He thinks that the intervention in Libya was illegal, was incredibly dangerous, etc. He said so at every stage. But the point he made is, look, if the point really was, as people like Samantha Powers and Hillary Clinton often said at the time, if the point was to just try to stop these immediate massacres that the extreme right-wing dictator of Libya was about to carry out, then they could have done that with just some no-fly zones. And the point of bringing that up is precisely in order to unmask that the intervention that happened was not a genuinely humanitarian one. Similarly, in Syria, in fact, this is hilarious because oftentimes a certain kind of I think extremely simplistic and undialectical critic of imperialism will the same way they accuse Chomsky of de facto supporting imperialism by telling the truth about Assad, or by saying that the way that the United States sort of went a few hundred yards in the other direction in order to let their imperial ally massacre the Kurds was bad, right, or somehow undermines his anti-imperialism. That same way, lots of leftists who have the equally unnuanced and undialectical take that that because Assad was so bad, you should support U.S. imperialism there, will accuse Chomsky of being an Assadist. He's neither one. He has a refreshing and important recognition of the complexity of the situation.
Aisha,
hold on.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
One comment. It's okay. This Ben actually made a perfect illustration of what I was saying. You kind of don't take class into account. He called Gaddafi an extreme right winger.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Actually, so that's why you have to look at the economic system of Libya under Gaddafi. And so the 16 things that Libya will never see again by Michael Parenti, for example, is that there was no electricity bill in Libya, and electricity was free for all its citizens. There was no interest on loans. Banks in Libya were state-owned, and loans were given to all citizens at 0% interest by law. In Libya was considered a human right. All newlyweds in Libya used to receive 60,000 dinars by the government to set up their first education, and medical treatments were free in Libya. Before Gaddafi, only 25% of Libyans were literate, and now, well, at least in 2011, 83% are literate. If Libyans wanted to take up a farming career, they would have received farming land, a farming house, equipment, seeds, livestock to kickstart their farm, all for free. If Libyans could not find the education or medical facilities they needed, the government funded them to go abroad to do it. If Libyans brought a car, 50% of them, the government subsidized 50% of this price. And every time a mother gave birth to a child, a Libyan received 5,000 US dollars. So just the fact that Ben couldn't tell the difference between who's left wing and right wing shows you that the importance of why we need a dialect.
Yeah, I think that the communists massacred in Libya would disagree with that assessment. The people brought for extraordinary rendition as part of the war on terror to Libya during the years of alliance with the United States would reject that. And if you actually look at the history of neoliberal economic reforms in Libya in the final years of Gaddafi and the way that the IMF praised him for that, that really undermines a lot of what we just heard.
Actually, no, because this actually is another one.
Okay, but we're gonna have to be quick on this just because we only have the rebuttals now. Okay,
that's not how the IMF is not. That's just not how the IMF works. You do not have a choice with the IMF because often they do what you call disaster capitalism. I have an entire episode about how the countries lose monetary sovereignty with the IMF, and often it's kind of done with the barrel of the gun. So I'll put a link to it on my Twitter. So yeah, so literally this shows the IMF. I have another episode on the history of the IMF. So the IMF is a tool of imperialism. And so again, Chomsky thinking. And also Gaddafi armed revolutionaries against the Western Empire, and there's a lot of wonderful things that Libya won't have. They're literally trading slaves right now, and so see, this is what happens when you don't have dialectic material: is that you turn into a tweet where you say there is absolutely no difference between bad. And I don't want you guys to turn into a drill.
Well, that's obviously a ridiculous straw man, but it's true that there are still slave markets in Libya, which is why Chomsky was right to oppose that intervention. And it's also true that the IMF is a tool of imperialism. But I think that if you can't tell the difference between collaborators with a tool to imperialism and resistors to that tool, you've lost the plot.
Okay, we're going to do the 5-minute closing statements. So I'm going to start with 5 minutes on the clock for you, Ben.
No,
oh, sorry, you said the other way around. Sorry. Okay, 5 minutes on the clock for you, Esha.
I think I said this, but so yeah, exactly, and that's why in order to be able to tell collaborators versus resistors, you really need to look at the finer details, and you need dialectic materialism, is what I would say. So we kind of agree on 90% of it, but I think that. The only way you can actually do that is through dialectic materialism, is what I have to add. Oh, no, I'm done.
Sure. So I think that I started out by quoting Tariq Ali talking about the reason for Chomsky's tremendous popularity in the Third World, in Latin America, and Asia. Because of the work that he's done methodically, analytically, opposing the crimes of the empire. And I think that it's important to recognize the reasons why he's been so effective in doing that, as well as what I would regard as the genuine limitations of his project, right? So what he's done, he could be doing anything with his life. He could just rest on his laurels of being the world's greatest linguist and inventing cognitive science in its modern form. But instead, he's used his position to do this relentless work as an anti-imperialist. And the reason that he's been so effective in that is because of the things that Nathan Robinson talks about in the article that I recommended earlier, Lessons from Chomsky. So one of those is just the fact that he's this very clear and accessible writer. But another of those is that rejects simple binary distinctions. And this is profoundly important because, if Chomsky were doing apologetics, if any time a stick looked at the people's stick, if you looked at certain aspects of a country or, a situation and blinded yourself to inconvenient ones, then you just celebrated it, you identified it with the people, you denied its crimes, then you wouldn't have this kind of credibility when you do what Chomsky spends 99% of his time on, which is exposing the crimes of the empire. Because if you just seem like a hack apologist, you're just not going to be effective in that. When he talks, as he often does, about the Washington consensus between Republicans and Democrats and why it's incredibly dangerous, how it needs to be fought against, how consent is manufactured for that. And by the way, recognizing how manufacturing consent works doesn't mean just blindly and undialectically assuming that the opposite of whatever the empire happens to say about any subject is true. That's not good analysis. But if he's going to do all that, I think it's important that he's also honest about the tactical questions that arise in elections. So I'll give up any time I have after this because Esha's statement was so short. I know mine has already been much longer, but I'll just say this as a final point, that it's important to also do the things that, as Ali recognized in that first statement, as Daniel Bessner often talks about Chomsky in his generation of leftists often aren't doing, which is thinking about strategy for power in countries like the United States so we can take down the empire from the inside. That has historically been Chomsky's role. But the kind of analytic rigor and brutal honesty that Chomsky brings to the table is an absolutely necessary starting point. And whether we're talking about swing state tactical voting or whether we're talking about the question of frankly recognizing that the working class was not wielding power in the countries that claim to be beating people with the people's stick, Chomsky represents an absolutely necessary starting point. And even if it's done in the name of outgrowing him, it would be a huge mistake to regress away from that starting point.
Okay, all right, thank you. Do you both want to give some quick, plugs to yourselves and your work and what do you do?
Yeah, please check out my podcast at historically.substack.com. And if Andre is in the audience, he can tweet out the link and, he can send the link and also the Twitter URL. I do a lot of detailed research and a lot of history, and you'll be surprised by how much we forget. We actually forget a lot, and we also misremember a lot. And it's really important, I think, just for everyone to kind of just look through the history and see what we've forgotten and what we've missed and what we got wrong the last time.
Ben?
Yeah, I think that's very important. So yeah, you can check me out on the Michael Brooks Show and the Dead Pundit Society every week. The David Feldman Show most weeks, and I have, if you like what I do and you think it's important and you want to support it, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/Ben Burgis, and I recently promised that if it got over a certain threshold of people supporting me there, I would do the literary equivalent of eating a bowl of spiders and read Glenn Beck's book about socialism. So my bowl of spiders has arrived, and I've started doing that. And I don't know, just thank you again. I know that it hasn't necessarily been easy to wrangle us, but I think it was an interesting discussion.
Question: whose debate did you enjoy? Me or when Jesse Lee Peterson kept on yelling "beta, beta"?
I'll tell you what. The one with Jesse Lee Peterson probably gave more people more joy. I know friends who will say that they'll get drunk and watch that, or they'll make everybody else they know watch that because they think it's hilarious, right?
Yeah.
But I think that this one was probably a lot more intellectually interesting.
Thank you.
Jesse Lee Peterson.
We should do this again sometime. But that was really bizarre. I admire you for Jesse Lee. Sorry, that was the bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah, I think probably until I die, every once in a while people are gonna like see me in an event and yell out beta, because as frustrated
you brought it on yourself, Ben.
As frustrated it was at the time, and I think you could see me get frustrated in that debate. I will also admit that it was hilarious.
Okay. Well, have a great day, both, everyone.
All right, thank you very much. Bye, guys. And everybody, I have been streaming for 6 hours, so I'm going to send y'all to DJ Indian. Please be nice to 1/3 of A Tribe Called Red. We'll do a deep dive and analysis of this debate and the stuff and all the things. You know the thing. Yeah, then thanks for stopping by, everybody. I am going to